This is One Sentence News, a daily podcast featuring 3 news stories with a sentence-long summary and 1 sentence of context apiece. I'm Colin Wright. This is a sponsored message. I've been using Anchor as my podcast host for a while now, and it's been a pleasure to use. Anchor offers benefits that most other hosts do not. It's free to use, but it also has a collection of tools that allow you to create a podcast completely within the Anchor website or smartphone app. They distribute your show to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other distribution channels without any additional effort on your part, and you can make money from your podcast without any minimum audience size. So you can use it as a more traditional podcast host like I do, but it's also got everything you need to start a podcast from scratch. If you're keen to give it a shot, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. It's Wednesday, October 5th, 2022. Let's talk about the news. From the Wall Street Journal, UN calls on Fed and other central banks to halt interest rate increases. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, a UN agency focused on economic things, has asked the United States Federal Reserve and other central banks, the agencies in individual countries that manage interest rates and such, to stop raising their interest rates so rapidly, lest they spark a global recession. These central banks are increasing their interest rates because that is a tried and true way to slow inflation. But in doing so, you also tend to chill the economy, which in turn can spark a recession. If a bunch of central banks hike interest rates all at once, that increases the likelihood of a global recession. That the UN is commenting on this suggests we've reached a point where the numbers they are seeing do not look good, and there's a real chance that what's already been done brings us close to the precipice. The Fed is widely expected to hike their key interest rate by another 0.75% at least by the end of the year. From Reuters, Australia to set aside at least 30% of its landmass to protect endangered species. Australia's government has announced that they will set aside at least 30% of the country's total landmass for ecological conservation as part of a larger effort to protect the unique species that live there, and in many cases, live only there. That's a lot of land. Australia is huge, the 6th largest country in the world by area, and they've already pledged about $146 million to protect threatened plants and animals. But they've also seen a series of incredibly destructive weather events these past few years, and the recently elected Labour government follows in the wake of a government that didn't believe in climate change, and which was more or less in the pocket of fossil fuel and mining companies. So this is a pretty big pivot that would seem to have the blessing of the Australian people, based on the vote that put this government into office and recent polls. And from Bloomberg, container ships cancel voyages from Asia as demand softens. Following 2 years of container ship shortages, the container ship industry is now having to cancel some of its routes as pandemic-disrupted supply chains normalize. Demand for Chinese goods from consumers in the US and EU dry up as their respective economies contract, and as overall spending tips towards services and away from physical goods. In some ways, this represents a return to normalcy after a period of strangeness, though it's also strange in a new way, because this is typically a high point in the shipping season, but much of the ordering that would generally arrive this time of year has already been completed, and whip cracks in the demand cycle caused by lockdowns in China, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and all kinds of energy industry weirdness has further upset expectations in what is otherwise a fairly predictable industry. If you're finding some value in One Sentence News, consider leaving a quick review wherever you get your podcasts and/or sharing the show with a friend. You can find out more about this show or subscribe to the email version at onesentencenews.com, and you can support this and other related projects like the Let's Know Things and Brain Lenses podcasts at understandery.com.